Okay, so I'm going to assume you have Unreal installed at this point, and I'm currently using 5.61. I'll eventually upgrade to 5.7 or if, later. What's nice about Unreal is you could always add the modules that come later in a lot of these through plugins. So don't worry if you're at an earlier version or later version. So I'm going to go ahead and hit launch to launch Unreal. All right, let's go up to the left-hand side here and hit games. And then we're just going to select third person. And off in the bottom right-hand corner here for my project name, let's just call this, you know, environment. And then go ahead and hit the create button down here in the corner. All right, once your project opens, you essentially get this default scene. And if you press play, it'll have a character that you can run around with. It's going to take a little bit of loading depending on how powerful your system is. What I'd like to do is just create a blank scene for us. So in our content folder here, just right click and then create a new folder. I tend to call my folder scene um, because I come from like a Unity background. A lot of times people who generally use Unreal more, they'll call them maps or whatever because we set it up with our maps. If you go inside of here, what we're going to do is we're just going to make a new scene and save it inside here. So let's go to file and go to new level. And I just want to do a basic level here and then hit create. And then let's just go to file and then save current level. And then I'm going to navigate to my scenes folder and just call this environment or ENV, and then just test. And we'll use camel casing for this. And what camel casing is the first word of every new word in your sequence for naming your file should have a capital letter rather. So environment test and then bad. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now, just as a refresher, you scroll your wheel in and out to zoom. You hold the Alt or Option key down and left click to rotate. You can select your one of your objects in your scene. You'll see it also selects it in the outliner, and then you hit F to focus. And then you definitely want to get a wheeled mouse for this. I'm not going to go through the entire interface right now. I'll go through it. You'll learn more about the interface as we build our game. I tend to find I would lose interest in a lot of lessons or lectures when you're spending a lot of time just sort of explaining little tidbits here instead of just getting into the fun, which is working in the editor. Another way of sort of getting around is if you click in your scene and you use your arrow keys or your WASD keys, you can use that to view. So let's go ahead and let's see. I mean, just so you get a pretty good look at your floor, select your floor in your scene or off on your left hand side or your right hand side here on the outliner. Go ahead and select the floor here. Go ahead and press delete. And then select from selection mode here. What we want to do is add a landscape. And what this will do is they'll give us essentially this giant mesh that we can manipulate the data on, the number of components, the resolution and stuff. And we can actually sculpt out the environment, which will create like a little hilly environment. We'll import in some assets in a second before we get into modeling. So let's start off by scaling down the size of our plane here. So instead of 63 by 63 quads here, we're just going to go with 15 by 15. And the reason for this is many of you might not have as powerful as a computer, or you're working off a laptop and you don't necessarily even need that much ground data. So we'll start here. If you need to, you could always create a new landscape even smaller, but for now I think 15 by 15 is good. Let's go ahead and hit the create button here. Now you can see it created our level, and we also have this little dark gradient that's following our brush around. What this is this is actually, as I mentioned, a brush, right? And we can use it to sculpt our terrain. Now I'm going to hit Command Z or Control Z to undo those changes. And what we're going to do is just kind of sculpt out a little bit of some hilliness for our character to run around. And this environment that was created, right? If this landscape, rather, when you click on it, you can see when we select it that it's actually a plane that has a lot of different components on it here. It has some world position, it has some data, it's collision. And let's take a look at that. So if I press play here, you can see I'm actually running around this environment. And if I hit escape, and I was using my WASD keys, by the way, to run around in case you missed that. If I click, for example, see how it's here? I click and create a little bit of an environment, and I press play here. You can see now my character will actually snap to or interact with the ground plane here. So see how it automatically by default runs around? So I'm gonna go ahead and hit escape again to exit there. Just like my player start, hit F to focus. And I'll hit F let's see. Oh, let's make that visible. And there we go. All right, so let's zoom in a little bit here. And oh, actually, you know what? We're on our landscape. We're kind of stuck on our landscape here. So it doesn't give you the option or allow you to select player start or any of the other components until you exit this mode. So if we leave landscape mode and we go to selection mode, I can select my player start here and hit F to focus and come back down here. And then if I select my landscape here and I go back to landscape mode, you can see it brings me back into that mode where we can do some editing on this landscape. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see that that's the case. See how when I click here, it allowed me to kind of raise the land a little bit. All right, now let's say, just briefly, you've created some landscape and you're like, oh, you know what? I'm too far along. I just want to create like a little valley here to, for my character to run through, right? Like I like this hill, but oh, I've done all this other work and I don't want to hit Command Z to undo that, or I just want to flatten out that area. What you can do is hit the brackets if you like and scale your brush down. You could also see as I'm hitting those brackets, this number here goes up and down on the brush size. So I'm just left clicking and dragging here. This is my tool string. And you can see here, there's these different things, right? There's like brush type. And then up here, there's sculpt, erase, smooth, and flatten. If I hit erase here, you can see it's almost erasing down into the environment itself. See that? Another way of doing it is if you hit flatten here, I can actually just flatten it down. And what it'll do here is it'll go down to as low as it can go in between, down to where the highest axis is of this plane. So now when I press play, you can see I've created kind of a cool little area for my character to run through. And actually, it looks like, yeah, so it's kind of looks pretty cool. So I have like this little valley, and then I can have maybe enemies or something waiting at the end there. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit escape on that. Zoom out a little bit this way so we could see that. It looks like my character is facing this way. So what I might want to do is just kind of go in here, grab my sculpt tool, just maybe sculpt out a little bit of a valley that way, this way, just around the edge of where my character is. I'm just again just showing you a little bit about how these tools work. We haven't really gotten into actually creating. Um, let's see, let's flatten all this out by our character here. We haven't really gotten into what our concept is going to be for our character. All right, so go ahead and do that just to kind of play around. Now when you press play, you could see, oh, we went a little bit too low, too high still. So let's erase. Let's use our eraser now and just erase that down. There we go. And it actually works with a tablet. So if you're a tablet like an artist and you do it for sculpting and stuff, you do it for sculpting or drawing. There we go. So now you can see we've got a pretty cool place for our character to start. And we're going to be using some materials and talking about things called shaders in a little bit throughout this lecture to make this look like a really cool, realistic environment. Something else I tend to do is you'll see there's this tool strength here. As I'm sculpting, if I'm using my mouse, I tend to leave this at like 0.15 or zero point 0.2, depending. And now you can see it's not as strong as I'm going through. And I also do like this click method versus a hold down the mouse method. And if you do the hold down the mouse method, you might want to go to like I was saying, a point 0.1 or lower. Um, and then that won't feel as jarring as if it's higher when you're sculpting. So that's the tool strength essentially deals with how strong the strength or the pull of your tool. So for example, like with sculpting, it goes up. With erase, if I set that lower to zero point 0.1, it'll be more, give me a finer eraser. It'll give me a little bit more nicer control, and it'll take a little bit longer for it to erase. Let's get that all the way down. All right, so what I want to do briefly is I know I want my player to start there. And what I'm going to do is just go around and just start with my sculpt brush. And this time I'll set it a little bit higher. We'll do zero point 0.2. And I'm just going to start creating the hills that surround it. Like, so let's go a little bit higher than that, just because of the speed of this tutorial. And we're just going to box in our character. So like this. And actually, let's go. Looks like my There you go. All right, let's go back to that point 0.5 for a second. Looks like we might actually need that. I'm going to expand the size of this with my brackets. There we go. That's going to give us what we need. Okay. And I'll pause the video just so you're not watching me do this. Just go off and on your own as well and just kind of create some hills around the edges and some mountains to really create like valleys for your character. All right, so here we are. Something you can do too is in areas where I want the character to sort of, I don't mind it being hilly, but I would like it to be not as jagged. I'll oftentimes grab my smooth tool here and I'll just kind of go in here and smooth it out. And that'll kind of keep the shape of that area, but it makes it a bit smoother. It doesn't make it as jagged. So let's press play and just take a look. And you always want to kind of test your level, look around. And that adds a lot of visual interest here. And like I said, we're going to be building out some environment pieces, adding some trees and stuff from the Quixel library. And if there's time in this lecture, I'll show you how to model and create your own trees, which is important because not always you can, it's good to just model your own stuff and learn how to do that so you can manipulate the other assets that you might find online. But overall, you're not going to find everything you need, especially if you're creating a fantasy environment. So it's important that you have those artistic skills. Anyway, I think this is a good place to stop for this lecture. And if I were, I would say between this lecture and the next one, really work this area and think about like what kind of environment would you want to do, and then maybe look at online for some environment reference. And we'll touch on that as well in another lecture.